When a 2-year-old girl sees a sick pit bull in the shelter, she decides she wants to adopt it, oblivious to the fact that the poor dog has been rejected by everyone because of its looks. But when her mother suggests they search for another pet, the little girl does something unbelievable. Audra had always known that her daughter was a kind and loving girl, but when she saw her stop in front of the cage of the saddest, smelliest dog in the shelter, she started to think she might also be a little delusional. She had promised little G that she would get whatever pet she wanted, and could not understand why she would point at this one among all the cute doggies at the shelter. Just beside its cage was a German Shepherd puppy with the sweetest eyes she'd ever seen, and yet her daughter only had eyes for the sick pit bull. Audrey had 2 reasons for disliking the dog G was excitedly pointing at. 1. It was a pit bull. She didn't want to be close-minded, but she knew that pit bulls are among the strongest, furriest, and most protective dog breeds, and she didn't know if she would ever feel safe leaving her young daughter in the same room as such an unpredictable animal. What if it bit her while they played? The force of its bite, even a playful one, could easily break G's delicate fingers. And what if they managed to domesticate it, only for it to snap every time they invited new friends over? What kind of mother would she look like if her friends and family saw a morbid beast inside her home? Second, the dog was clearly sick. It smelled terrible, its eyes and nose kept running, and it was missing several patches of fur. To be honest, it didn't really look like the cute dog she had envisioned an hour earlier when she had bundled little G in the car for the trip that would change their lives forever. Audra's daughter had been begging her for a dog for as long as she could remember. Her literal first word had been doggy. She had fallen in love with the animals by watching her neighbor's golden retriever sunbathe on its porch, and had immediately decided she needed a doggy of her own. For a few months, Audrey had simply told her she was too young to take care of a pet. But now that she was 2, and was finally capable of doing everything by herself, she didn't have any more excuses. And if she had to be honest, she too liked the idea of a soft pad inside the house. Not only will a dog be a perfect companion and protector for her daughter, but it would also bring warmth and fun into their house and provide them with an excuse to be out and about more often. But she didn't like that dog. "What's wrong with it?" she asked the shelter staff, doing her best to conceal a disgusted expression. They explained that the poor pit bull had a bad case of mange, and that she was also battling another respiratory infection. They were giving her medicines, but she simply lacked the strength to fight. Unfortunately, her life hadn't been very happy up until that point. Apparently, the pit bull had been born to 2 A-listers in the world of dog breeding. Her owner had been expecting another star to sell at a high price, but had instead found himself with a sickly dog whose snout was just too wide and coat was just too brittle. She couldn't be sold at all, so the poor thing had simply been kicked out as soon as her mom weaned her. She had been rescued by a good Samaritan, but he was an old man and had unfortunately passed away just a few months later. His family had refused to take his dog in. They had surrendered the little pit bull to a shelter. She had been adopted right away, but the owners had taken her back just a week later, stating that the dog did nothing but cry and sniff. The shelter staff had tried to explain that she had just lost the first person who had ever shown her love, but the family had not budged. They wanted a happy dog, not a grieving mass of fur. But of course, the rejection didn't improve the dog's mood. The poor pit bull was afraid of her kennel and the barking of other dogs. It was just too shy to socialize and kept catching colds. Only later did the shelter vet find out that she was suffering from a chronic condition and that she needed surgery in order to improve. But the shelter didn't have the funds to pay for the operation, and no prospective pet owner seemed to be interested in a dog that came with a hefty price tag and no certainties on the surgery outcome. So the little pit bull had been rejected once, twice, 3 times more, and by the time she had turned 1, she had known very little in her life besides the sad-looking walls of her shelter cage. She didn't seem likely to come out of her shell soon, and the shelter staff had started to fear that she would never leave her cage. Worse, they were painfully aware that another bout of sickness would put her right on the euthanasia list. But that's when G and her mother had walked in, and the little girl had immediately stopped in front of her cage. "Doggy's sick, need help," she said, tugging at her mother's dress. Audra was dumbfounded. How did her daughter know that the dog was sick? She didn't know what mange was, and the shelter staff had only spoken to her. She must have noticed the snot coming out of its nose and guessed that the pit bull had a cold or something like this. Suddenly, Audra's heart warmed at her daughter's compassion. "Can you please take her out and let her play with my daughter?" she asked the shelter staff. A staff member unlatched the dog's cage and tried to coax the pit bull out of it. However, the poor thing started shaking uncontrollably at the sight of the human approaching her. Terrified whimpers broke Audrey's heart. Another staff member came to them with a leash, but almost retreated when she noticed the dog's reaction to her colleague. However, she had not anticipated what little G was about to do. The girl kneeled down, not caring that she was brushing her pretty dress on the floor of the shelter. She tentatively reached out with her hand, making sure to leave it a few inches away from the dog's face. It was clear that she didn't want to frighten the pit bull. Audrey's breath caught as she saw the dog's snout inch closer to her daughter's hand. The pit bull looked pretty weak and harmless, but it was still a dog and could easily snap and bite. She was about to pull G away from the cage when the dog's little tongue brushed against her fingers. G let out a squeal of delight. She extended her fingers towards the dog and let her sniff her, chuckling softly as she licked her hand. Surprisingly, the pit bull nuzzled her big head against the little girl's hand, letting G pet her. The shelter staff was amazed. They had been trying so hard to socialize the dog, and the results had been underwhelming, to say the least. And yet, this little girl had only spent a few seconds with the pit bull, and she was already petting her. The staff member with the leash decided it was worth a try and gently approached to clamp it onto the dog's collar. The pit bull trembled as she approached, but then relaxed when she backed away, leaving her alone with G. The little girl grabbed the leash and gently tugged on it, coaxing the dog out. Shockingly, the pit bull didn't need to be told twice. She slowly got out of her cage, nervously looking around, but seemed emboldened by G's presence by her side. The two of them walked around together, with G stopping more than once to clean the dog's runny nose and caked eyes with her own dress. Her mother didn't even find the strength to wrinkle her nose. The sight was too cute to worry about a dirty piece of fabric. Me. This one, G said as she played with the dog. And just like that, Audra realized she was going to adopt the sad-looking, smelly, sick dog her daughter had taken pity on. She sighed as she moved to the counter, smiling at the puzzled faces of the shelter staff. They too couldn't believe that the sick pit bull was finally getting adopted. Audra inquired about the surgery the dog needed to have, how much it would cost, and what she should feed her in the meantime, and so on. She already spoke like the dog was hers. However, there was one little obstacle she would need to overcome first. Even if shelters are desperate for people to adopt their animals, they don't just give them out to the first family that walks through the door. Every prospective owner needs to be screened to make sure that the pet goes to a loving family in a safe environment that will be suitable to its needs. Of course, Audra understood. She was actually relieved that she had chosen such a competent establishment to adopt her dog. She made an appointment with the shelter staff for a home visit the following day and prepared to leave with her daughter in tow. However, she didn't seem too keen on abandoning her new friend. As soon as the staff member put the dog back into her cage, she started shaking uncontrollably, and G burst out crying at the sight. "Doggy's sick, Mama," she cried. "Need help, go home." Audra's heart broke at her daughter's tears. She kneeled down in front of her and tried explaining to her that the dog would be theirs the following day once the kind people from the shelter made sure that they would be the perfect fit for her. This was all in the name of the dog's well-being, she told her. But Guy didn't want to listen. "Go home," she kept crying, pointing at the pit bull. In the meantime, the dog was whimpering as well. Audra looked at the staff apologetically, preparing to pick her daughter up and forcibly take her out of the establishment. However, what she saw in the staff's eyes made her realize that a forceful intervention would not be needed. They were all so surprised at the instant bond that had developed between the little girl and the dog that they were willing to bend the rules a little. She had been unbelievably sweet and compassionate towards the pit bull, and they simply had to respond in kind. So, one of the staff members volunteered to drive to their house right now and quickly check it out to make sure the dog would have the best life in their hands. Audra breathed a sigh of relief as she told G that they were bringing the dog home with them. Another staff member rushed to get the pit bull out of her cage again. Unsurprisingly, the little girl dashed towards the dog, enveloping her in a sweet embrace. The pit bull let herself be hugged and immediately stopped shaking. It was like G was her own personal weighted blanket, and she only felt safe in her embrace. At Audra's home, the shelter staff member walked through the rooms and inspected every corner. In the end, he told Audra that her house was perfectly suited for the dog. It was still baby-proofed after all, and there were no sharp corners or steep steps that could prove dangerous for the delicate pit bull. Before he left, Audra asked him for the shelter vet's number. She wanted to call him as soon as possible to set a date for the dog's surgery. She couldn't bear to see her in so much pain, and if she were to be honest, she also wanted her to stop sneezing on her floors. Audra called the vet that very night, and they decided the dog would undergo surgery 3 days later. In the meantime, G proved to be the perfect dog owner. She bathed the pit bull herself, finally getting rid of that awful smell, and made sure she ate exactly as much as the shelter staff had indicated. However, she also snuck the pit bull plenty of snacks behind her mom's back. She decided to name her Scarlet and vowed to be by her side always and forever. The day of the operation came, and when the surgery was over, Scarlet already looked like a different dog. She would need some time to completely heal and fight the infections that had taken hold of her body. But this time she seemed to be ready to fight for her future. She had a real owner now, and little G was her reason to live and thrive. 6 months later, Scarlet was unrecognizable. Gone forever was the smelly, sad-looking dog with a runny nose and crusty eyes. Her fur had grown back thicker than ever, her eyes were clear, and her tongue was always out to lick her little human's hands. Thanks to G's encouraging presence, she was starting to make friends with the neighbor's dog, the golden retriever that had inspired G to become a dog owner. Audra couldn't be prouder of the choice her daughter had made. She had saved a poor, hopeless dog from a bleak future, and in turn she had gained a friend for life. She had always thought of pit bulls as aggressive dogs, but Scarlet was the sweetest soul she'd ever met, and her protectiveness of G only made her love her more. Life was perfect for them, and it was all thanks to her daughter's compassion towards an animal who desperately needed someone to love her. What a beautiful ending! Would you adopt a sick dog knowing that you'll have to pay for its treatment? What would you say to little G and her mother? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.